The first time I realized my reflection was lying to me, I was already wearing her sweater. It wasn't some dramatic reveal, no lightning bolt or gasp, just the quiet weight of fabric on my shoulders and the way my name sounded wrong in my own head. I remember standing in our apartment hallway, the mirror by the door catching me at an angle I couldn't escape, and thinking this must be what it feels like when a life tilts without asking permission. The sweater was soft, faintly scented with her detergent, and it hung on me in a way that felt both borrowed and strangely destined. She was watching me from the kitchen, arms crossed, expression unreadable, the silence between us charged with everything we hadn't said since the fight. I'd hurt her. Not with betrayal or cruelty, but with a careless dismissal that landed deeper than I'd meant. I'd laughed when she told me about a childhood memory, about being told she was too much for liking dresses and science at the same time, and I'd said something stupid about people choosing to be offended. The words had come out casual, almost joking. The damage had not been casual at all. She didn't cry. He didn't yell. She just looked at me like she was taking notes. Her revenge, I would learn, wasn't loud. It was meticulous. "Try this," she'd said earlier, holding up the sweater like a peace offering. "Just for tonight." Her voice was calm, careful. I told myself it was a joke, a costume, a way to break the tension. I told myself a lot of things. What I didn't tell myself was why my hands were shaking as I pulled it over my head. In the mirror, I didn't look like a punchline. I looked unresolved. The sweater softened my shoulders, hid angles I'd never questioned before. My hair, longer than I usually noticed, brushed my cheek in a way that made me flinch. I searched my own eyes for sarcasm and didn't find it. Instead, there was a flicker of curiosity, quickly followed by shame for feeling it at all. She came to stand beside me then, our reflections almost touching. "You know," she said lightly, "you'd make a good sister." The word landed with a strange echo, like it had been waiting somewhere in the room. Sister. Not girlfriend. Not joke. Something closer. Something permanent. I laughed too quickly. He didn't. That night, I dreamed of mirrors multiplying, each one showing a slightly different version of me, each one asking the same quiet question I refused to answer when I woke up. By morning, the sweater was folded neatly at the foot of the bed, as if it had decided to stay. By the second morning, the apartment felt rearranged even though nothing had moved. I noticed it while brushing my teeth, the mirror fogging up in a way that softened my face before I could harden it again with familiar expressions. She was already awake, humming a song I didn't recognize, something light and circular that looped in my head long after she left the room. On the counter beside the sink sat a small bottle I knew wasn't mine, clear glass, pale label, her handwriting on the cap like a private joke. I didn't touch it, but its presence felt intentional, like a bookmark placed exactly where the story wanted me to resume. We didn't talk about the sweater. That silence did more work than an argument ever could. Instead, she asked if I could help her organize the closet because she was tired of clutter. When she said it, she glanced at me in a way that suggested clutter wasn't limited to clothes. I followed her, telling myself this was normal couple stuff, that I was overthinking it, that the mirror was just a mirror and not an invitation. The closet smelled like cedar and old memories. She handed me hangers and instructions with gentle authority, and I complied because compliance felt easier than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear answered. Halfway through, she paused and held up a dress. Not dramatic, not glamorous, just simple and well-worn, the kind of thing that belonged to everyday life. "This doesn't fit me anymore," she said. "But it might fit you." I opened my mouth to protest and heard my own voice falter. The dress looked like something a sister would borrow, something returned with apologies and gratitude. "Just to see," she added, softer now, as if negotiating with both of us. I told myself I was proving a point by agreeing, that I was showing how absurd the idea was. I told myself I was brave. In the mirror, the dress rewrote me in quiet ways. It didn't transform me into someone else. It revealed a version of me I'd been editing out for years. My posture changed before I noticed it. My hands, unsure at first, settled at my sides with a new kind of patience. I searched her reflection for triumph and found something closer to recognition. "See," she said, almost fond. "It's not a punishment. It's an introduction." That word, introduction, stuck with me as the day unfolded. When we stepped outside for groceries, she walked half a step ahead like an older sibling showing the way. I felt the weight of strangers' glances, the heat rising in my face, the urge to shrink and the surprising urge not to. Fear and something like pride wrestled in my chest, neither winning outright. Back home, she pressed the small bottle into my hand at last. "For your hair," she said. "You don't have to use it today." Her eyes met mine in the mirror, steady, patient. Choice she was offering me, wrapped in inevitability. I set the bottle on the counter, right where I'd see it every morning. The mirror reflected us both, closer now, like the space between us was learning a new shape. I didn't know what I'd choose yet. I only knew that the story had moved past the point where pretending was possible. By the third day, the mirror had become less of an enemy and more of a witness. I caught myself checking it without flinching, the way you glance at a window when you're no longer afraid of what's on the other side. The bottle stayed where I'd put it, a quiet dare, and the song she'd been humming returned in fragments as I moved through the apartment. It felt like the place itself was learning a new rhythm, one that matched the slower cadence of my thoughts. I told myself I was still in control. I also noticed how carefully I chose that phrase. She suggested coffee with her sister that afternoon, casual as if it were any other errand. The word sister snagged on me again, but I nodded before I could reconsider. In the bathroom, I stood with the bottle in my hand, reading the label as if it might change its mind. When I finally used it, the scent bloomed around me, clean, gentle, unmistakably hers, and I felt a strange gratitude, like I'd been trusted with something fragile. Getting dressed took longer than usual. Not because I didn't know what to wear, but because I did. The dress from the closet, the sweater layered just so, shoes that made me walk more deliberately. Each choice felt like a sentence added to a letter I wasn't sure I wanted to send. In the mirror, my reflection looked composed. Nervous, yes, but also intentional. I practiced my smile and found one that felt honest enough to keep. Her sister greeted us with an easy warmth that made my chest ache. She looked at me, really looked, and didn't stumble over anything. No awkward pause, no searching for the right word. "You must be the famous sibling," she said with a grin, and something inside me loosened, surprised by how badly it wanted that to be true. We sat, we talked, I listened more than I spoke, and when I did speak my voice sounded different to my own ears. Lighter but not smaller. The tension I'd been bracing for never arrived. Instead, there was an unexpected calm, a realization that the world didn't end when I took up space differently. Walking back to the car, she squeezed my hand just once, a private signal. In the mirror later, alone again, I traced the outline of my face and noticed the way my eyes held the memory of being seen. That night, the song finally made sense to me. It was about becoming, about letting the chorus repeat until it sounded like truth. I lay awake, the sweater folded nearby like a promise, and wondered when exactly this had stopped feeling like revenge and started feeling like revelation. By the fourth part of the week, because that's how my mind had started measuring time now, in parts instead of days, I realized the mirror wasn't just watching anymore. It was waiting. I stood in front of it after she'd gone to work, the apartment quiet in a way that felt intentional, like it was giving me room to hear myself think. The dress hung on the back of the chair, the sweater folded with care, and for the first time there was no one else around to guide me, tease me, or reassure me. The choice felt heavier without her presence, like learning to ride a bike after the hands let go. I put the dress on slowly, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to rush whatever this feeling was. Each movement felt rehearsed and improvised at the same time. In the mirror, I noticed how my expressions had softened without effort, how my shoulders no longer insisted on taking up space they didn't need. I tried saying my name out loud and felt it resist me like a coat that no longer fit right. When I tried saying nothing at all, my reflection seemed to breathe easier. The mirror had become a symbol without my permission. It used to confirm who I thought I was. Now it asked who I was willing to be. Later, when she came home, she stopped short in the doorway. Not in shock, never that, but in something like quiet awe. "You look comfortable," she said, and I realized that was the first compliment that hadn't made me want to deflect or joke it away. Comfortable wasn't about appearance. It was about alignment. We cooked together that night, moving around each other with a new choreography. She handed me a spoon and called me sis without looking up, casual and devastating. The word no longer felt like a joke or a threat. It felt like a door left open on purpose. I laughed, then caught myself smiling when she smiled back. Later, alone again, I faced the mirror one more time. I imagined it cracking, not from pressure but from change, old expectations splintering to make room for something truer. I touched the glass, just lightly, and whispered the song's chorus under my breath. It sounded less like rehearsal now and more like memory. That was the night I understood the real tension wasn't between who I was and who I was becoming. It was between who I'd been performing for and who I finally wanted to recognize me. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small frictions like walking against a current you didn't know was there until your legs got tired. A neighbor paused a beat too long when she saw me in the hallway, her smile polite but puzzled, as if she were trying to solve a riddle she hadn't agreed to. On the bus, a pair of teenagers whispered and laughed, not loudly enough to confront, but just enough to make me wonder which version of me they were laughing at, the one I used to be or the one I was becoming. I felt the old reflex flare up, the instinct to disappear, to fold myself smaller and apologize for existing in a way that confused people. My hands trembled, and for a second I hated the mirror for ever starting this conversation. But then I remembered the way her sister had smiled at me without effort, the way sibling had sounded natural in someone else's mouth, and I straightened my back. Fear was still there, but it no longer owned the whole room. When I told her about it that night, I expected sympathy or anger on my behalf. Instead, she listened quietly, then asked, "Did it change how you felt about yourself?" The question landed harder than any insult. I thought about the mirror, about the dress, about the way my name felt increasingly foreign. "No," I said slowly. "It made me realize how much I don't want to go back." She nodded, like that was the answer she'd been waiting for. "Revenge," she said softly, almost amused, "was never about hurting you. It was about making you feel what it's like to be seen, and misseen, and still decide who you are." She reached out and adjusted the sweater on my shoulders, a small, intimate correction. "You're doing better than you think." Later, alone, I stood in front of the mirror again. I noticed how my eyes no longer searched for permission. They searched for truth. The song came back, quieter now, less like a loop and more like a heartbeat. I realized something then that scared me more than the stairs ever could. I wasn't just experimenting anymore. I was grieving the person I'd been, even as I felt proud of the person standing there now. The mirror didn't judge, just reflected. And for the first time that felt like enough. It arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary evening. We were sorting laundry on the couch, a domestic ritual that suddenly felt symbolic in ways I couldn't ignore. Her clothes and mine no longer separated themselves into neat piles. Fabrics overlapped. Colors blended. I caught myself folding a skirt with the same absent care I used to reserve for my own shirts, and the realization made my chest tighten, not with fear but with finality. She watched me for a long moment before speaking. "You know," she said, carefully neutral, "we don't have to pretend this is temporary." The sentence hovered between us, fragile and powerful. My first instinct was to joke, to soften it, to keep the air breathable. Instead, I looked at the mirror across the room, the one that had followed me through every turn of this story, and stayed quiet. Silence stretched. Not awkward, expectant. "I don't know who I am without pretending," I finally admitted. Saying it out loud felt like stepping off a ledge and discovering there was ground beneath me after all. My voice shook, but it didn't break. "I just know I don't fit back where I was." She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that breath for weeks. "That's all I needed to hear," she said. Not triumph. Not victory. Relief. That night she handed me something wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a simple necklace, nothing flashy, just a small, smooth pendant that caught the light when I moved. "For the mirror," she said with a half smile. "So when you look, you remember this isn't an accident." I put it on, fingers clumsy, heart racing. In the reflection, it felt like punctuation at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. Later, alone, I stood there again, necklace warm against my skin, and tried to imagine going back. The image felt distant, unreal, like a role I'd already been recast out of. Fear still whispered, about family, about strangers, about names and expectations, but it no longer spoke the loudest. Pride had found its voice, tentative but growing stronger every time I listened. The mirror showed me someone standing at the edge of something irreversible. I didn't step back. I didn't step forward either. I just stayed. The change announced itself in my voice first. I noticed it while leaving a message on my phone, my tone gentler, my cadence unfamiliar in a way that made me stop and listen to myself like a stranger. I replayed it twice, not out of vanity but because it sounded right. The mirror confirmed it later, not in appearance alone, but in posture, in the way my face seemed to relax into expressions I no longer had to rehearse. She started introducing me differently, almost absent-mindedly at first. "This is my sister," she said to a coworker at a cafe, her voice steady, unquestioning. My heart spiked, then settled like it had been bracing for a fall that never came. The coworker smiled, nodded, and asked me what I wanted to drink. The ordinariness of it nearly undid me. Not everyone was so easy. A relative on the phone hesitated, corrected herself, then apologized too much. Each pause felt like a small test of endurance. I learned how to breathe through it, how to answer without shrinking. Every time I chose to stay present, something in me grew stronger, like a muscle finally being used for its intended purpose. The mirror became a place of rehearsal and reckoning. I practiced expressions for conversations I hadn't had yet, names I wasn't ready to claim, futures that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The necklace caught the light as I moved, a quiet reminder that this wasn't a phase someone else was directing. It was a path I was walking even when my steps were unsure. One evening, as the song played softly from her phone, she leaned against the doorway and watched me. "You know," she said, not unkindly, "I don't see you as someone I changed anymore." I turned to her, my reflection splitting between us. "I see you as someone who finally stopped arguing with herself." The word herself echoed, startling and soothing all at once. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. The mirror held the moment, steady and patient, as if it had been waiting for that pronoun all along. I realized then that revenge had dissolved into something else entirely. What started as a lesson had become a handoff, a passing of truth from one version of me to another. And there was no way to return it without losing what I'd gained. It came the afternoon I opened a box I'd been avoiding since the beginning, the one tucked under the bed like a time capsule I wasn't sure I deserved to open. Inside were old photos, clothes I'd kept out of habit, not attachment, and objects that once anchored me to a version of myself that felt increasingly theoretical. I sat on the floor with the mirror angled nearby, watching my reflection change as I held each relic, measuring what still belonged. Some things hurt to let go of. Not because I wanted them back, but because they represented certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from being told who you are and believing it without question. I felt grief then, real, physical grief, for the ease of that life even as I knew I couldn't return to it honestly. The mirror didn't soften the truth, but it didn't exaggerate it either. Giz stayed. She joined me quietly, sitting beside me without commentary. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised me with its steadiness. "I don't miss him," I said, meaning the person in the photos. "I miss not knowing I had a choice." She nodded, her shoulder warm against mine, and I felt the comfort of being understood without needing to be explained. Later we donated the clothes together. Dropping the bag off felt ceremonial, like closing a chapter without burning the pages. Walking away, I caught my reflection in the car window, faint, imperfect, undeniably present, and felt a strange joy bloom in the space where fear used to live. That night, the mirror reflected something new, ease. Not confidence exactly, but the absence of constant resistance. The song played again, softer than ever, and I realized I no longer needed it to remind me who I was becoming. It had done its job. The last thing I put back in the box was the necklace's tissue paper, folded carefully, a reminder of how this all began. The box slid back under the bed, lighter now, and I knew some goodbyes don't ask for tears. They just ask for honesty. Visibility has a weight to it. I felt it the first time we attended a small family gathering together, the kind where everyone pretends nothing has changed while quietly cataloging every difference. Conversations flowed around me like a river I'd once swum easily. Now I was learning new strokes. Some people were kind in ways that felt careful, others distant in ways that felt practiced. A few surprised me with effortless acceptance, and their ease felt like sunlight after a long winter. I caught my reflection in a hallway mirror there, narrow, slightly warped, impossible to ignore. For a moment, doubt surged. Was I strong enough for this? Was comfort at home just a rehearsal for disappointment out here? Then I saw my posture, how I stood without bracing for impact, how my eyes met my own without flinching. The mirror didn't lie. It reminded me I'd already survived harder moments than this. Later, alone in the guest room, I let the feelings catch up with me. Pride tangled with fear. Joy tangled with grief. I thought about the version of me who would have hidden in that room all evening, and felt a quiet gratitude that I hadn't. When she checked in asking if I was okay, I surprised us both by saying, "I am. I'm just tired of being brave." She smiled, soft and understanding. "You don't have to be brave all the time," she said. "Sometimes you can just be." That night, the mirror in the guest room reflected a truth I hadn't expected. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Not because everyone understood, but because I finally understood myself well enough to stay. The song hummed faintly in my memory, no longer a guide, just a companion. I lay awake thinking about tomorrow, about introductions yet to come, about names and labels that would eventually settle. The uncertainty was still there, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like space. I noticed it on an ordinary morning, standing at a crosswalk with my hands in my pockets, watching my reflection ripple across the dark glass of a parked car. I wasn't checking anymore. I wasn't measuring. I was just there. The realization landed gently, like a truth that didn't need to announce itself to be real. For the first time, I understood that the mirror had done its work not by changing my face, but by teaching me how to see. That afternoon she asked me a question she'd clearly been holding back. Have you thought about a name? Not a demand. Not an expectation. Just an opening. My first reaction was panic. The kind that comes when something feels too permanent to touch. Names have gravity. They pull futures toward them. I shook my head at first, then hesitated. I've thought about how my old one feels, I said. Like it belongs to someone who did his best with what he knew. She smiled at that, not sadly, not nostalgically, but with respect. That sounds like a good person to thank, she said. Not someone you have to be anymore. The kindness in that reframing nearly broke me. I'd spent so long treating my past self like a mistake instead of a foundation. Later, alone, I stood in front of the mirror again, necklace catching the light, and tried a few names out loud, not committing, just listening. Some fell flat. Some felt like costumes. One made my chest tighten in a way that wasn't fear but recognition. I didn't repeat it. I didn't need to. The mirror heard it anyway. That night, as we sat together, she rested her head on my shoulder and said casually, "I'm proud of my sister." The words settled into me without resistance. Pride rose, warm and steady, not loud but undeniable. I realized then that acceptance wasn't a finish line. It was a practice. One I was finally willing to show up for. It wasn't about dresses or sweaters anymore. It was about laughter spilling across the kitchen table as we cooked, about the way sunlight hit my face just right through the living room window, about catching myself humming the song she'd introduced me to, not because I needed it but because I wanted to. The mirror no longer reflected only what I looked like. It reflected what I had survived, what I had chosen, what I had earned. A friend came over unexpectedly that afternoon. I felt the old knot in my stomach, the instinct to shrink, to hide, to preface every sentence with an apology for existing differently. Instead, I straightened. I spoke. I laughed. And when they looked at me, curious and cautious, I realized I wasn't seeking permission anymore. I was simply present. The reflection in the hallway mirror caught my smile then. One that didn't have to be tested or rehearsed, and I finally saw it fully. Someone whole, someone brave without meaning to be. Later, alone in the apartment, I traced the outline of the necklace, the small pendant that had silently accompanied me through every quiet revelation. I whispered the song's chorus one last time, not as a mantra, not as a guide, but as a celebration. I felt the pulse of change settle into something permanent, something unshakable. Fear would still visit. Of names, of strangers, of expectations, but it no longer controlled the room. I had learned to inhabit myself fully, in every mirrored reflection and shadowed corner. And just before sleep, I finally allowed myself a thought I had been resisting since day one. I was exactly where I was meant to be. The morning light spilled across the floor, warm and steady, and I realized I hadn't thought about undoing anything for weeks. The sweater was folded neatly on the chair. The dress hung where it belonged, the necklace glinting against my collarbone like a quiet witness. I walked to the mirror not out of obligation, not out of fear, but simply to see. And for the first time, I didn't recognize the reflection as a beginning or a punishment or even a transformation. I recognized it as home. She joined me silently, standing just behind, her presence comforting rather than commanding. "Ready for today?" she asked, a playful edge in her voice. I smiled, understanding that today wasn't different because the world had changed. It was different because I had. "I think I am," I said and meant it. The mirror caught that smile, steady and unforced, and I traced the familiar line of my jaw, the curve of my shoulders, the tilt of my head. This was me in the simplest, bravest sense. I didn't need anyone else's approval. I didn't need the past. I only needed the truth I had discovered for myself. As we stepped into the day together, hand in hand, I felt something profound and unspoken. Revenge had led to revelation, coercion had led to choice, fear had led to freedom. And in every reflection, every glance, every moment that followed, I carried that quiet, unstoppable knowledge. I was my own person. My own sister. My own story. And finally I was whole.